It started like a perfect afternoon. A warm June sun hung over a quiet California cul-de-sac, casting soft reflections on a backyard pool where 3 children played. Laughter echoed through the fenced yard. Sprinklers ticked across the lawn. A family barbecue was underway, the kind that smelled like sunscreen and grilled burgers. Parents lingered by the patio, distracted for minutes, maybe seconds. It didn't matter, because by the time they turned their heads back toward the pool, the water was still. The air held no sound. And the 3 children, 6-year-old Lily Monroe, 8-year-old Daniel Reyes, and 10-year-old Cara Dalton were gone. No splashing, no screams, no footprints. Just towels left folded by the edge of the pool, and 3 empty juice boxes, still cold to the touch. The panic began instantly. First, the parents tore through the house. They checked bedrooms, closets, and under beds. Then came the neighbors, called over by cries they could feel in their bones. Police arrived within an hour. Search teams, dogs, helicopters. They canvassed a 5-mile radius. No broken fences. No signs of forced entry. The gate to the pool was locked from the inside. No tire tracks on the lawn, no witnesses. Nothing but the still blue water and the echo of laughter that had vanished too soon. The house became a headquarters. Maps were taped to the walls. Red pins scattered like blood drops across coordinates. The parents stopped sleeping. They waited by the phone for ransom calls that never came. Volunteers combed through local woods and storm drains. Divers searched nearby reservoirs. Still nothing. It was as if the earth had opened and swallowed them whole. The media descended quickly. 3 children vanishing without a trace. It was the kind of mystery that took root in the country's psyche. News trucks lined the street. The cul-de-sac transformed into a grim spectacle. Interview requests flooded in. The parents pleaded on live television. Their voices raw, hands clutching photos of their smiling children, faces that now seemed like ghostly echoes of a life before. Days turned into weeks. The posters began to fade. The candles at vigils melted into wax puddles. Leads dried up. A tip about a white van led nowhere. A reported sighting in Nevada turned out to be unrelated. Even psychics were brought in, each with contradictory visions and dramatic proclamations that led nowhere. The case grew cold, not officially, not to the parents. But to the rest of the world, the story became a haunting headline from the past. Years passed. The families tried to rebuild. One moved away, unable to walk past the pool again. Another refused to leave, convinced their children might somehow return. Birthdays came and went, marked not with cake but with candles lit in silence. The backyard pool was drained and covered. What had once been a place of joy became a monument to absence. But grief has a long memory, and the truth has a strange way of surfacing when least expected. It began again 30 years later, not with a new witness, or a confession, or even a DNA match, but with a plumbing complaint. An aging house just 3 blocks from the original scene had been abandoned for years. Foreclosure, then fire damage, then disuse. New owners purchased it to flip, planning a full renovation. Contractors arrived to reroute the plumbing system. Simple work, just routine, until a crew jackhammered through the concrete slab in the basement and hit something unexpected. Not pipes, not wiring, wood. A trap door. They stopped immediately, called the site supervisor, who called the local sheriff, who called in the FBI. When the agents arrived, they descended into the basement and opened the panel. A narrow staircase led downward a second basement. No records on file, not part of the blueprints. It smelled of mildew and something else. Old earth, stale air, and time. They found 3 rooms, carved into the foundation, rudimentary but livable, each with a bed, a chair, a plastic shelf lined with children's books decades out of print, wallpaper peeled from the damp stone. A poster of a popular cartoon from the late 80s still clung to one wall. In one room, initials were etched into the wooden bed frame. First names, all 3, Lily, Daniel, and Cara. It wasn't a tomb, it was a prison. And the strangest part? It had been empty for a very long time. Inside, forensic teams found traces of hair, old toys, and rusted locks. Clothing fibers that matched what the children had worn on the day they vanished. A red ribbon that matched one worn in Lily's hair in the last known photo. No bodies. No signs of death. Just the chilling remnants of life held in secret. But whoever had done this had vanished just as cleanly as the children once had. The stairs showed signs of use. Not recent, but not ancient either. The food storage area was packed with long-expired goods. Canned fruits and vegetables from the early 90s. Medical supplies. A logbook with pages torn out. There was one photo, found in a drawer. Grainy, slightly overexposed. 3 children standing stiffly in front of a blank wall. Their clothes were mismatched. Their faces older but unmistakably them. A timestamp on the back read 1996, 7 years after they vanished. The world shifted. 30 years of silence cracked open. The FBI made a public announcement. The case was reopened. Age progression experts were brought in. DNA from the site matched samples from the family members. The children had been there, alive, for at least several years after the disappearance. But why did they vanish again? Where did they go? Who was keeping them? And why did it all stop? These questions reignited everything. And the answers would lead to places no one expected. The announcement shattered the stillness of 3 families who had spent decades learning to live beside an empty place. 30 years of grief had settled into their bones like old weather. And now it had been stirred up by a trapdoor and a photo, by proof that somewhere, somehow, their children had once been alive long after the world stopped looking. Lily's mother, Deirdre Monroe, hadn't moved out of her home after the disappearance. She'd painted over the mural in Lily's room once, then painted it back. She'd packed up the toys only to unpack them again. The FBI's call came just before midnight. A federal agent confirmed what she never let herself say aloud. "We have verified evidence your daughter was alive in 1996. The next morning, the Monroe house filled with people, reporters, neighbors, a caseworker, and 2 agents from the Behavioral Analysis Unit. They spoke gently, but their questions carved open old wounds. Did Lily know anyone in the area? Did she ever complain of being followed? Were there relatives or friends with basements? Deirdre only shook her head. No, no, and no. Lily was 6. She liked watermelon gum and wore red jelly sandals. Her favorite word was puddle. How could a 6-year-old have enemies? Across town, Daniel's father, Eduardo Reyes, had lived the last 30 years trying not to see his son's shadow in other boys. He ran a mechanic shop now and kept his head down. When the FBI showed him the photo, his knees gave out. "That's him," he whispered. "My boy." He looked scared. Cara Dalton's parents had divorced 5 years after she vanished. Grief had taken different shapes for each of them. Her mother, Melanie, had buried herself in advocacy, founding a missing children's fund. Her father, Greg, had disappeared into Alaska, unreachable, untraceable. Melanie was the one to see the photo. She pressed her fingers to the glass screen like she could touch Cara's cheek through the static. "I knew she wasn't gone," she said. "I just didn't know where to look." The FBI's Special Task Force set up shop in a mobile command unit less than 2 blocks from the cul-de-sac where it all began. They reopened every box, rescanned every lead. The basement beneath the abandoned house was carefully cataloged. Every scrap of cloth, every hair fiber, every smudge on the wall. The initials, L, D, and C, were cut with a tool, not carved by hand. Clean edges, intentional. Someone had marked those beds, claimed them. Inside the hidden rooms, they found more than personal objects. They found a pattern. Each room bore distinct traces of identity. Lily's had crayons and paper, with faded drawings of stars and rainbows taped to the wall. Daniel's room had a pile of toy cars in one corner, wheels cracked but preserved. Cara's space was stark and older, no toys, just books and a tattered stuffed bear missing its eye. Each room had one shelf, one lamp, and one blanket. They were identical but different. That's what chilled Agent Megan Harrow the most. They were separated, she said, but treated like inventory. Then there was the photo, taken with a cheap camera, flash too bright. The wall behind the children was bare cinder block. No timestamp from the camera itself, just a handwritten note on the back. 8/16/1996. 7 years after they vanished. The three children stood shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. They weren't smiling, weren't crying either, just blank. Like dolls posed in a shop window. The forensics team ran facial recognition software against public school yearbooks from the late 90s through the early 2000s. No matches. They checked dental records, child welfare registries, and even overseas refugee photos. The children never re-entered any system. No paper trail, no digital footprint. It was like they had emerged just for that photo and disappeared again into the walls. Speculation exploded online. Forums reignited. True crime blogs resurrected archived posts. Conspiracy theories swirled. Cults, government experiments, secret tunnels. But the families didn't care about any of that. They wanted answers. Real ones. The FBI released a controlled portion of the findings to the public. The hope was that someone would recognize the furniture, the wallpaper, or the basement's layout. They even recreated the room virtually, letting anyone with a computer step inside that dim concrete prison. That's when something strange happened. A retired contractor from out of state called the tip line. He said he recognized the type of staircase in the photos. It was a modular design used in military surplus bunkers during the 1980s. We installed 4 of them, he said. One of them is right here in this county. The records led to a builder named Wallace Dorman. He had worked construction between 1984 and 1990. No criminal history. Never charged with a crime. But when the FBI visited his last known address, they found an empty trailer and unpaid bills. Wallace Dorman had vanished in 2001. Neighbors remembered him. Friendly, odd. Kept to himself. Liked gardening. Built a shed in his backyard, then tore it down 6 months later. Always working on something, one said, but never finished anything. They pulled old permit records. One stood out, a zoning request for an in-ground storm shelter on the same property as the now renovated house. Approved in 1989, closed in 1990. That was the year Lily, Daniel, and Cara vanished. The FBI dug deeper into Dorman's past. Born in Sacramento, 2 younger sisters. Served briefly in the Army. Dishonorably discharged in 1978. No details publicly available. Hospitalized once for a psychiatric episode in 1982. No marriage, no children. And no further records past 2001. It was like he'd taken the children, hidden them away, and then vanished himself. But why? Why would someone build a secret prison in a suburban basement? Why keep the children alive for years, then let them vanish again? And how had no one heard them? Agent Harrow stood in the lower level of that house, staring at the peeling walls. The rooms were soundproofed, she said. Not professionally, but effectively. Layers of drywall, rubber sealant, and foam between studs. Someone planned this. Someone who knew what they were doing. But something about it didn't feel right. The setup was too careful, too methodical. It felt repeatable. This wasn't just a one-time event. It might have happened before, and it might have happened again. The FBI expanded their investigation beyond California. Using records from the Department of Defense and old contractor logs, they identified 3 other properties in the western United States that had once employed Wallace Dorman. All of them had similar features: rural or suburban locations, zoning permits for non-standard basements or storm shelters, and sudden resale or abandonment after 1990. One in Idaho, one in Arizona, one in Oregon. The Idaho property was first. An old farmhouse long since collapsed, sold off in a foreclosure auction. The new owner, a rancher, had bulldozed the structure but left the foundation intact. Underneath it, nothing, just a root cellar, damp, filled with rodent nests and mold. No trapdoors, no stairs, no signs of habitation. Arizona was next. The site had been converted into a parking lot, but ground-penetrating radar found something beneath the asphalt, a sealed cavity. They excavated carefully. Inside, they found a chamber, much like the California basement. Concrete walls, 3 rooms, same shelving units, same layout. No names carved into the beds this time, but there were signs. Scratches, bits of fabric, a torn shoelace, 2 plastic spoons snapped at the neck. But no children, no names to match, no reports of disappearances in the immediate area. The third site in Oregon had burned down in the early 2000s. Nothing remained but ash and memory. The original blueprints were lost in a local flood. There was nothing to find. But the pattern was clear. 3 houses, 3 underground structures, 3 children in each case. No coincidences. Someone had built more than a prison. They'd built a system. Agent Harrow began to wonder if Dorman was really working alone. Because somewhere along the line, the story started to splinter. Back in California, the forensic team reanalyzed every item found in the basement. They dusted the shelves, swabbed the beds. Under ultraviolet light, a handprint emerged, faint but real on the inside of the trapdoor. It was too large to belong to any of the missing children, and too recent, which meant someone else had been there. Not in the 90s. Recently, Agent Harrow stood at the edge of the staircase, staring down into the trapdoor's yawning dark. "We think someone has been maintaining this place," she said quietly. "Checking in, maybe preparing to use it again." They widened the scope of surveillance, interviewed past owners, dug into utility records. The abandoned house's water heater had been replaced in 2011. The electricity turned on briefly in 2014. Then again in 2019. Every few years, Harrow said, just enough to keep things from falling apart. But who? Dorman had disappeared in 2001. No credit activity, no vehicle registration, no passport, no sightings. The last known photo of him was from 1999. A DMV renewal, tired eyes, unkempt beard, nothing that screamed predator, but nothing forgettable either. They ran his face through aging software and tried to estimate how he might look now, then sent the composite through national security databases. A hit came in from New Mexico. A man matching Dorman's features had been seen entering a storage unit registered under the name Caleb Woodbine. The alias had a thin paper trail, 1 P.O. box, 1 phone number, and 1 UPS account. All opened in 2008, all inactive since 2020. The FBI sent a team. Inside the storage unit, camping gear, expired food, and newspapers from 3 different states, all featuring missing children on the front page. But none of them were Lily, Daniel, or Cara. These children had vanished long after the original 3. The latest photo was from 2015. A girl named Alana Meyer, age 9, missing from a school parking lot in Utah, never found. Agent Harrow stared at the collage taped to the unit's inner wall. 9 faces, 9 names, 9 empty dates, 9 ghosts. She called headquarters. "It's bigger than we thought," she said. This wasn't just a one-time abduction. This was a system, a ritual, maybe a belief, and I don't think it ended in 1996. They reclassified the case. It was no longer a cold case. It was an active domestic terror investigation. The parents of Lily, Daniel, and Cara were brought in again. The FBI didn't tell them everything. They couldn't, but they told them enough. That their children might have been held as part of a pattern. That other children might have come after. That this was not just a tragedy. It was something worse. Deirdre Monroe asked one question. "Are they still alive?" Harrow didn't answer right away. "We don't know." But they did know one thing now. Someone had taken meticulous care of the basements, replenished the goods, maintained the power, replaced the locks. Someone had visited. Someone had kept the memory of those children alive in a way far more literal than anyone had imagined. And then came the break. A local mail carrier in a small town 2 hours north of Los Angeles reported something odd. A reclusive man, maybe in his late 60s, who picked up mail once a month and never spoke. He drove an old Winnebago, had no known employment, And once, just once, the carrier had seen a glimpse through the curtains. A girl, thin, pale, hair to her waist, standing very still at the window. He'd assumed it was a granddaughter, until he saw the FBI sketch on the news. The next day, the Winnebago was gone, but not without leaving traces. The carrier remembered part of the plate. The police canvassed highway cameras, found the vehicle heading east. It had stopped for gas at a roadside station. The attendant remembered the man, bought diesel, duct tape, and powdered milk. The girl stayed inside, didn't look up. The FBI moved fast, pulled satellite data, heat signatures, cross-checked vehicle sightings. The Winnebago was spotted turning off a remote service road that fed into the high desert national forest. Unpaved, unmonitored, desolate. Agent Harrow assembled a task force. They went in at first light. But what they found there would change the case forever. The forest swallowed sound. Agent Harrow stood at the edge of the clearing, listening for anything. A branch cracking, birds scattering, or the hum of a generator. Nothing. Just the press of heat and pine and the faint static of radio chatter in her ear. The Winnebago sat crooked between two trees, its rear tires half sunk into the dirt like it had been parked in a hurry. The blinds were drawn, a plastic tarp stretched from the side door to a tree, forming a makeshift shelter. Beneath it, a camp chair, a water jug, a pair of muddy boots, but no sign of movement. Harrow raised her hand, signaling the team forward. They fanned out in silence, boots on moss, hands on weapons. She reached the RV door and tried the handle. Locked. She nodded to the breach unit. They moved in with quiet efficiency. 2 taps, a crowbar, and the door popped open. Inside, the air was thick, not just with heat, but with something else: antiseptic, sweat, plastic, time. The interior was dark, lit only by a single battery lantern hanging from a hook. It cast long shadows across the clutter: medical kits, canned food, old books, a space heater, and rolls of duct tape. A twin mattress had been laid across the floor in the rear, covered in a faded pink sheet. On the wall beside it, crudely taped, were hand-drawn pictures, crayons, stick figures, suns with smiling faces, names scrawled in child handwriting. But no children. The place was empty. Harrow's stomach sank. She moved toward the back of the RV, brushing aside a hanging curtain. In the small bathroom, a toothbrush sat in a cup, hair in the drain, a mirror cracked from corner to corner. And there, in the tiny shower stall, something taped to the wall: a photograph. Another one, this time recent. A girl standing in a clearing, eyes wide, hair long and tangled, holding a newspaper with the date clearly visible. She looked about 12, but it was hard to tell. Trauma distorts age. There was a note, scrawled in shaky handwriting below the photo. "She's clean. She doesn't remember. Don't break her." Harrow stepped back, throat tightening. This wasn't a one-time event. This wasn't Wallace Dorman. This was someone new. Outside, another agent called out. They'd found footprints, small ones, leading into the woods. 2 sets, 1 adult, 1 child. Recent, within the last 6 hours. They followed them until they reached the edge of a ravine. There, the tracks ended at a rope ladder disappearing down the side of the canyon. Below, hidden by dense foliage, another structure. Smaller than the California basement, but freshly built. The boards were clean, the hinges still gleamed. Harrow descended first, weapon drawn. At the base of the ladder, a wooden hatch led into the side of the hill. A trapdoor again, always a trapdoor. She opened it slowly. Inside, the air was cold. The room had been carved into the slope itself. A single chamber, 6 feet across. A cot, a desk, a stack of children's books, a coloring book with pages half filled. One page showed a drawing of a family, a man, a girl, and a house. The house had no windows, just a door. A sun hovered above it like an eye. The cot was still warm. The girl had been there recently, but she was gone now. The FBI widened the search radius. They brought in dogs, helicopters, mounted units, but the terrain worked against them. Ravines, tunnels, dozens of caves and abandoned mines. Days passed. Then weeks, but no sign of the man or the girl. Until a sighting came in from a ranger station 50 miles north. A girl matching the description had wandered into a camp store asking for food. When the ranger tried to engage her, she panicked, ran back into the woods. The ranger followed, but she was fast. She disappeared into the trees before he could call for backup. They found a discarded jacket. Inside it, a name tag. Cara. Agent Harrow stared at the name until it blurred. Cara Alvarez. Missing since 1990. Last seen at a pool party on a summer afternoon, laughing in the sun. Could it really be her? 30 years later? Survived, escaped, but conditioned into silence. The girl hadn't asked for help, hadn't tried to call anyone. She'd just asked for food. She hadn't said her name, which meant she still didn't know who she was. Or maybe she'd been taught to forget. The FBI set up a base in the area. Posters went out. Checkpoints were set up. Every exit road is monitored. Search teams moved in rotating grids. And then, one morning, a hunter came across a girl sitting beside a stream. She was barefoot, thin, pale. Her clothes were mismatched and too big. Her hair in knots, but her eyes held something else. A flicker of knowing, of wariness. He didn't approach. He just called the number he'd seen on the posters. By the time the team arrived, she was gone again. But they found something in the mud where she'd sat. A button, shiny, red, still attached to a corner of a child's dress. The kind worn in the 90s. Back at the command center, Agent Harrow laid out the evidence. The drawings, the photos, and the note in the RV. The underground rooms, the timelines, the names. 3 children, 3 decades, 3 states. And now, one had resurfaced. At least partially. They reanalyzed the 1996 photo again, the one found in the California basement. A tech noticed something odd in the upper corner. A glint, a reflection. They enhanced it. It was a mirror. In the mirror, barely visible, a blurry silhouette. An adult figure. But it wasn't Wallace Dorman. The posture was different. The shoulders are broader. The hair is darker. A new suspect. A new timeline. Maybe even a new group. Agent Harrow drew a circle on the evidence board. Connected the photos. The basements. The sightings. The name tags. Then she paused. There was a pattern. But something didn't fit. 3 children went missing. They had found one name, one girl, but what about Lily? What about Daniel? What about the others? And most chillingly, what if they hadn't escaped at all? The girl didn't speak, not at first, not to the ranger, not to the paramedics, not even to the trauma counselor assigned to her bedside. She flinched at fluorescent lights, clung to the corner of the hospital bed, and kept her back to every open doorway. When asked her name, she hesitated. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. They offered her food, she took only applesauce. They offered a blanket, she wrapped it over her head like a hood, shielding her eyes from everything but the floor. It took days before she would allow anyone to touch her, and longer still to say a word. But one night, just past 3 a.m., she whispered, "Daniel." A nurse on rotation heard it and wrote it in the chart. The name matched the case files. Daniel Reyes, missing June 12, 1990, 10 years old at the time, the oldest of the 3 children who vanished from the pool that day. No one had spoken his name in decades without sorrow. But now it held something else. The girl's DNA came back 3 days later. It was her, Cara Alvarez, alive, 32 years old, biologically, but neurologically, she seemed trapped somewhere between 8 and 12. Psychological age regression, the doctors said. A protective measure. Dissociative identity patterns shaped by years of confinement, conditioning, and emotional manipulation. She remembered nothing clearly. Not the pool, not the basement, not her parents. She remembered shadows, routines. Daniel always took the top bunk, she said days later. He was taller, he got the vent. They asked, "What vent?" She pointed upward. There was no vent in the hospital room. He used to let me read the blue book, she added, with the ducks. Investigators found a blue children's book with cartoon ducks among the evidence recovered from the second basement. It was real. Her memories, fragmented, stunted, were real. Dr. Kim, the trauma psychologist overseeing her recovery, approached slowly, gently. He brought in sensory triggers, music from the late 80s, smells like crayons and sunscreen, and even the sound of pool water played through a speaker. She flinched at that last one. But then he said something strange. "We never swam." Dr. Kim asked what she meant. After that day, we never swam again. He said it was too dangerous. That was what got us taken in the first place. Taken, a word she'd never used before. Not kidnapped, not stolen, not missing. Taken by someone who believed they were saving them. Back at the field office, Agent Harrow stared at the board. There were now 2 confirmed locations, 3 children, 1 survivor, but the timeline was fractured. The 1996 photo showed 3 children alive, but now only 1 had been found. What happened to Daniel? And Lily? She pulled out the basement floor plan again, marked where the names had been carved. On Daniel's frame, DR scratched deep. On Lily's, small hearts drawn with a blunt pencil, surrounded by the letter L. On Cara's, nothing. When she asked the girl, she just said, "I wasn't allowed to write. I didn't earn it." The words landed like lead. Who set those rules? Who decided which child got a name? The logbook recovered from the RV offered more clues. It wasn't a diary too clinical for that. More like inventory records, dates, times, and rations distributed. Medical notes, dosages. Each child was assigned a number. L equals 2. D equals 3. C equals 4. But where was number 1? The earliest entries began months before the 1990 disappearance. Notes about construction, material orders, supplies, then one sentence, nearly indecipherable. Subject 1 failed. Retired. Retired. A euphemism for death? Or release? They searched the area again, this time with forensic geologists. What they found shook them. Behind the hill bunker, 20 feet downslope, cadaver dogs alerted to something below the surface. They excavated carefully. 6 feet down, wrapped in a canvas tarp, they found a child's remains. No clothing, no ID, but the bones suggested a child between 6 and 8 years old. Decomposition consistent with 30-plus years. No apparent trauma, just buried, forgotten. Back at headquarters, dental records were inconclusive. The child had never been reported missing. Not in California. Not in Oregon. Not anywhere. Subject 1 had no name. No poster. No search. A ghost child, used for practice, then discarded. It confirmed the worst fear. The man responsible had done this before, maybe more than once, and he was still out there. The working theory changed. Wallace Dorman, the original suspect, was no longer believed to be the primary perpetrator. He may have enabled it, helped build, fund, even observe. But the rituals, the structure, the logistics, the discipline, they pointed to someone else. Someone with medical knowledge, psychological tools, and complete emotional detachment. The team began cross-referencing child abduction cases from the late 80s across multiple states. Patterns emerged. Clusters, each with strange consistencies. Children vanishing from public places, parks, pools, and schoolyards. No witnesses. No ransom demands. no returns, and always in threes. They expanded the search again. More basements, more trapdoors. They found another in Nevada. Burned out, caved in, no bodies, just toys. And another in Utah, collapsed beneath a barn. Inside a broken bunk bed, a tiny sandal, a drawing on the wall, 3 children holding hands. One girl had pigtails and a heart-shaped scar drawn on her knee. Cara had one in the exact spot, burned into her skin, a scar no one had noticed before. When shown the drawing, she touched her knee gently and said, "Lily drew that." "Who's Lily?" they asked. Her hand froze, then trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked up and whispered, "She's still with him." Agent Harrow felt her chest tighten. Still with him. Not dead. Not missing. Alive. Somewhere. The moment the words left Cara's mouth, everything changed. She's still with him. Not past tense. Present. That subtle shift cracked open every hardened assumption, every closed case file, and every theory built on the unspoken belief that all 3 children had vanished together into the same silence. But if Lily was still with someone, if she had survived the others, if she'd never been retired, never escaped, then they were racing a clock that hadn't yet run out. Agent Harrow canceled her flight home. The task force was doubled. Cara was moved to a secure trauma rehabilitation center with on-site FBI support. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the only living witness to one of the longest-running abduction cases in U.S. history. But trauma doesn't open easily. And memories under siege rarely return in neat timelines. When asked direct questions, Cara would retreat, eyes going glassy, curling into herself like a child hiding from a storm. But sensory cues worked better. On her 5th day in the center, they brought her a doll. Old, fabric hair, button eyes. She didn't look at it, just whispered, "Lily had the red one." That night, during a lightning storm, she ran from her room, barefoot in the hall, screaming, "The buzzer means be quiet." It took 2 hours to calm her down, and when she spoke again, it was through fragments. He had rules. You couldn't cry during the morning meal. If you made noise, you had to sit in the dark box. "What was the dark box?" Dr. Kim asked gently. She drew a square with her fingers. "The bathroom closet, but with no light, sometimes all night." By the end of that week, they had a sketch profile. Their suspect was methodical, obsessive, and antisocial, possibly religious in his discipline. He separated the children by roles. Daniel, the oldest, was the watcher. He helped distribute meals. Cara was the silent one. Lily? She was the song. She had a beautiful voice, Cara said, rocking in her chair. She'd sing us lullabies, even when we weren't allowed. He didn't like it, said it stirred the old ghosts. "Whose ghosts?" Dr. Kim asked. "The ones he tried before us." The team scoured missing children reports again, this time focusing on unsolved abductions from low-income communities, places that didn't make national headlines. The numbers staggered. And the pattern reemerged. Groups of 3, always with one child slightly older, always in places near wooded structures, always in late spring or early summer. It had taken them decades to see the web. And now, with Cara's help, they were tracing the threads backward. In the lab, forensic analysts re-examined the trapdoor house. In the walls of the second sub-basement, hidden behind deteriorating insulation, they found a cavity. Inside were more objects: a baby tooth and a matchbox, a red shoelace, 2 crude bracelets made from yarn and buttons. Each was cataloged and DNA tested. The tooth matched Daniel. The bracelet fibers matched Lily's sweater from the 1996 photo. But the shoelace? It belonged to someone else. Not one of the original 3. Another child entirely. An unidentified girl, age estimated at 6, missing from a different state 5 years earlier. That child had never been reported missing. It was as if she had never existed. Cara's testimony filled in the blank. "She came before us. she said, curled up in the therapy room. He said her name was Hope, but that wasn't her real name. She didn't talk. She bit. So he said she was broken. She was only there for a little while. Then one day, she was gone. We were told not to ask. She picked up the doll again, her hands trembling. Lily cried all night after that. Did he hurt her? Dr. Kim asked. Cara nodded slowly. But only in the quiet ways. He didn't like bruises. Said marks were weakness. Do you remember his name? She shook her head. No names. He said names made us soft. He only let Lily use them when she sang. That's why she sang them all the time. Our names, like spells. It was the strongest confirmation yet that Lily had endured the longest, that she had found a way to keep the others connected to their former lives through song. That perhaps even now, somewhere, she still whispered those names into the dark. The FBI shifted focus from recovery to capture. They released an age-progressed image of Lily to the public, shared it with hospitals, shelters, religious institutions, and organizations across the western states. They reopened all cases with similarities, created a database just for 3 child clusters, and then finally, a lead. A woman in Arizona running a volunteer soup kitchen called the Tip Line. A few months earlier, an older man had come through with a girl who looked to be in her early 30s but acted much younger. She rarely spoke. She hummed, mostly children's songs, sometimes just names. Danny, Care Bear, Lilo, over and over. The man claimed to be her father. She said she had developmental delays, but something about the interaction hadn't sat right, especially when the girl had recoiled from a sudden noise, dropped her tray, and whispered, "No dark box, please." They pulled the security footage. The girl's face was blurry, but her hand? On her wrist was a faded tattoo of a heart, not inked but burned, a scar in the shape of love. Just like the one Cara had described Lily drawing over and over, on paper, on her skin, on the wall. A search of local medical clinics showed a woman matching her appearance had been treated for malnutrition 6 months earlier. The intake name? Ellie Song. The surname matched nothing. But the intake nurse remembered her humming during the exam. Hearts and Stars, she'd called it. A lullaby. They cross-checked everything. The hymn had no known lyrics, but Cara recognized the melody. That's Lily's song, she said. It was all the proof they needed. Lily was alive. The town was called Saguaro Ridge, a blip in the Arizona desert, quiet, sun-baked, fringed with rust-colored mesas and long-forgotten mining roads, a place where people went to disappear. Retirees, drifters, ghosts pretending to be neighbors. When the FBI descended, they did so quietly. No sirens, no lights. Just plain sedans and agents in breathable suits, stepping into the desert heat with a photo of a girl and the hope of recovering a name from a song. The soup kitchen sat on the edge of town, a low building with peeling stucco and a sagging roofline. Inside, volunteers ladled stew into paper bowls while ceiling fans creaked overhead. The same intake nurse from months ago was still working. She remembered the man clearly, tall, stooped shoulders, salt and pepper beard, and eyes too sharp for his kindly voice. He said his name was Peter, that she was Ellie, but she didn't talk much, just watched the floor and hummed. She remembered the humming vividly. The names she sang, they didn't sound made up. They sounded like prayers. Surveillance footage showed them entering the building 3 times over the course of 2 months. Same man, same girl, always dressed plainly, always leaving quickly. But one visit stood out. The last one, they arrived just before closing. The girl carried a paper bag like it was sacred. She offered it to a young volunteer, saying just 4 words, "For the other kids." Inside the bag were 3 wooden figurines, handmade, childlike, one carved with a triangle on its chest, another with a small star, the third had a burned heart. Cara was shown a photo of the figurines. She stared at them for a long time before whispering, "That's me, Daniel, and Lily." It was her voice that cracked open the next door. The figurines had markings, scratches beneath the base, almost like Braille. Analysts enhanced the etchings and discovered coordinates. Remote, deep desert, a narrow valley with no road access. The figurines weren't toys, they were a message. A unit was dispatched before sunrise, navigating the dry riverbed in modified ATVs, bouncing over ridges and through cactus fields. The coordinates led to a stone outcropping, barely visible from above, shielded by overgrowth and natural camouflage, and nestled within the rock, a cabin. Not new, but not ancient either. Metal roofing, reinforced windows, a generator out back, no satellite dishes, no power lines, completely off-grid. No one answered the knock. No one spoke. But when they breached the door, they found her. She sat in the middle of the cabin floor, cross-legged, hands folded. Her hair was long, brushed, and streaked with gray. She wore a simple blue dress, clean but faded. And when the agents entered, she didn't flinch, didn't rise, just looked up at them with eyes that had seen too many things and said, "I was waiting." "Your name?" one agent asked. She didn't answer that, not at first. Instead, she reached for a small wooden box beside her, opened it. Inside were 3 more figurines, one burned, one broken, one whole. She offered them up like relics and whispered, "I'm Lily." The room fell silent. They brought her in quietly, like they would a witness or a sacred text. Not in handcuffs, not with urgency, with reverence. She didn't resist, didn't ask questions. In the back of the FBI vehicle, she sang softly to herself, rhythmless but deliberate, almost like she was reciting scripture no one else remembered. When Cara saw her, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood. And Lily stood too. And they embraced like the years between them had been a breath. It was only later, when the interviews began, that the fractures revealed themselves. Lily was alive, yes, but she was not whole. Her voice was slow and flat, not monotone measured, like every word passed through a filter. She didn't refer to the man who raised her as captor. She called him the keeper. He said he was watchful. He said he knew what the world did to special children. The name Peter was a pseudonym. The FBI believed his real name was Walter Everly, a former social worker dismissed in the late 1980s for boundary violations. The records were sealed. But Lily knew him only by titles. Sometimes he was father. Sometimes he was shepherd. When he was angry, he was master. But when he sang to me, he called me Starling. "Did you try to escape?" they asked. There was nowhere to escape to. He said if I left, the ghosts would find me, that the dark box would come back. She recounted the years in fragments, the house with the trapdoor, the second basement, the way he would rotate the roles of each child. Daniel, the protector. Cara, the quiet. Herself, the memory keeper. He made me remember the others, even when they were gone. Said it was my punishment and my privilege. And when asked about Daniel, her hands trembled. He stopped being quiet. He started questioning, started drawing maps, hiding food. That's when the keeper said he needed correction. Did he? The agent couldn't finish the question. I never saw him again. Lily confirmed what Cara couldn't. Daniel had died, likely in the trapdoor house before the basement was sealed. His body was never found, but the logbook's torn pages had notes in Daniel's handwriting. Plans, routes. He'd tried to lead them out. He'd died trying. Cara sobbed when she heard that. Lily only bowed her head. Grief, when frozen for 3 decades, has a different shape. And when they asked why she stayed with the man after the others were gone, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she unbuttoned her sleeve and showed them the underside of her forearm. A latticework of old scars, etched letters, shapes. He said if I stayed, I'd keep the world safe from becoming like him. The agents fell silent, and one finally asked, "Do you think you did?" Lily smiled, a small, sad smile. I kept their names. That's what mattered. The press conference the FBI held was brief, clinical. They confirmed Lily's identity, announced the reopening of multiple investigations, stated that a suspect was still at large. But the world saw something else. A woman walking beside federal agents, her spine straight, her dress simple, her voice too soft for the microphones to catch. A miracle, but also a warning. The funeral was held 6 weeks later, on a Sunday in early spring. They had nobody to bury, no remains to lower into the ground. But that didn't matter. They had a name. They had a face. They had enough. Daniel's memory had waited too long in the shadows. Now he deserved a place in the light. A gravestone was placed beside an empty plot, etched with his name and the words, "He tried to lead them home." Only Lily and Cara knew how true that inscription was. The ceremony was small, family. A few agents who'd worked the case, one or two volunteers who had spent decades walking woods and knocking on doors. Lily wore gray. Cara read a passage from a book Daniel used to quote from, his favorite about explorers and impossible paths. No one spoke of the trapdoor. No one mentioned the basement or the bruises or the plans scribbled in the margins of torn paper. Instead, they spoke of his drawings, the ones he'd made for Lily and Cara when they were scared, the maps, the carvings, the symbols. The boy who fought with paper and pencil because the world had given him no other weapons. After the service, Lily sat on the grass for a long time. Just sat, hands in her lap, lips moving silently, eyes fixed on the stone like she was waiting for it to answer. When Cara approached, Lily didn't look up. She only said, "I hear him sometimes. Not in words, in wind, in humming wires. I don't know if it's memory or magic." Cara sat beside her. "I hear him too." They stayed until the sun dipped behind the hills and the grass turned gold. The FBI continued to search. A task force was built around the idea that Walter Everly or Peter or Shepard or whatever other names he'd used was part of something larger. He had moved through systems, schools, shelters, and medical institutions, always on the edge, always with new names and forged credentials. He had disappeared in 1998, last seen in Texas, working under yet another alias. No fingerprints in databases, no living relatives, just a string of suspicions never fully pursued. But they did find one thing. In a storage unit rented under one of his false identities, they uncovered a metal box. Inside, VHS tapes, dozens, none labeled, all hand, transferred from camcorder reels. Agents watched in silence. Children, some they could identify, others they couldn't, all recorded in silent rooms, standing, sitting, responding to unheard prompts. Most videos featured Lily, Daniel, and Cara, documented over years. Their growth, their resistance, their collapse. A methodical descent into obedience. The tapes were submitted as evidence. Digital forensics experts cataloged them. Analysts cross-referenced faces with cold cases. A few matches were made. Most remained nameless. But one tape stood out. It was different. A single shot. One room. Lily alone, maybe 15 years old. She was looking directly into the camera. She wasn't speaking. She was holding a book open to a page with a drawing. 3 figurines. Beneath them, a phrase written in thick marker, "The door will open." That footage was dated June 11, 1997. One day before, a massive thunderstorm hit the area and knocked out power to the region. A timeline that aligned precisely with the date Lily was later spotted walking barefoot into a gas station 15 miles from the trapdoor house. It was the night she ran. It was the night she left Cara behind. She had made it out once before. She had returned. The agents asked her about it in private. She didn't deny it. "I found the door unlocked," she said. "I don't think he knew. I ran. I made it to the road, but the world was too big, too loud. I walked until my feet bled. I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to be." "Why didn't you go to the police?" She looked at her hands. "Because he told me if I did, Cara would die. And I believed him." She turned herself around that night, walked back into the dark, climbed down those same steps, shut the trap door. When the agents asked why she never told anyone, not even Cara Lily's voice broke for the first time. Because what kind of sister leaves, then comes back, then leaves again? There were no answers to give her, only silence, only understanding. Cara forgave her before she ever had to ask. In fact, it was Cara who found the next clue. She was helping Lily settle into a temporary apartment provided through the agency's relocation services. The walls were blank. The furniture is minimal. But Lily had one box with her. A wooden crate she refused to let anyone else carry. Inside were drawings, letters, keepsakes, paper flowers, a red ribbon, and, at the bottom, a photograph. Not of the three of them as children, but of another child, a boy, standing next to Peter in front of a school somewhere in the Midwest. The timestamp read 1983. 10 years before Cara and Lily were taken. "Do you know who this is?" Cara asked. Lily nodded slowly. "That's the one who came before." The boy's face was blank, his body posture is stiff, but the look in his eyes was unmistakable. It was the same look Lily once had, the same look Cara saw in the mirror every day. Silence that had teeth. They handed the photo over to the task force. And 2 weeks later, a match came back. The boy's name was Travis Elkins. He had disappeared from a foster home in Nebraska in 1984. Never found, never spoken of again. But now he might be the key. Because the age progression software showed something chilling. Travis Elkins might still be alive. And he might be hiding in plain sight. Cara and Lily stood beside the FBI agents when they briefed the press. No details were released, no names, just the announcement that more leads had emerged, and the investigation had expanded across state lines. But for those who knew, it wasn't just about solving a cold case anymore. It was about tracing a lineage, about stopping something that may have begun long before Cara, Daniel, and Lily ever disappeared from that quiet cul-de-sac in California. It was about finishing what Daniel started. The task force followed the new lead to the Midwest, a small town in Missouri where a man matching the age-progressed image of Travis Elkins had applied for a driver's license under the name Alan Brooks. He had no digital footprint before 2002, no credit history, no school records. He worked as a groundskeeper at a private religious compound, one tucked into the woods, with high fences and a philosophy steeped in secrecy. He lived in a one-room cabin, rarely spoke, and kept to himself. When agents arrived to question him, he didn't resist, didn't lie, didn't run. He said calmly, "I knew someone would come eventually." Inside his cabin, they found the photo Cara had handed over, tucked inside a Bible. It was folded neatly, as if handled often. The corners were worn down by time and fingers. When asked about the man beside him, Peter, the one they'd called Walter Everly, he said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "He raised me, he broke me, then he built me again. I ran when I was old enough to fight back, but by then I'd learned to disappear, so that's what I did." But there was more. In a hidden crawl space beneath the cabin floor, agents discovered something else. A box filled with cassette tapes, meticulously labeled by year 1984 through 1989. Each marked with initials. Some are familiar, something new, all of them presumed victims. Hours of audio, some blank, some full of whispered conversations between Peter and his students, some in English, others in coded phrases that linguistic analysts would spend months trying to decipher. But it was one tape that cracked everything open. Labeled only with a symbol, a drawn eye. On it, a recording from 1986, Peter's voice, clear and measured. "The program must evolve. The children must be molded. But it is time to test their obedience with separation. If the experiment succeeds, it will prove what the mind can do in solitude. If it fails, the fault will not be in the method. The fault will be in them." Cara listened to the tape in a secure room, her hands shaking as she reached to stop it. Lily sat beside her, arms crossed tightly, face expressionless. They had always wondered if they were special. If they had been chosen because of some dark uniqueness, but now they understood. They weren't unique. They were iteration, trial, refinement. It wasn't just one basement, or one trapdoor, or one captor. It was a system, a belief. A man who had passed through towns and counties and homes, perfecting a methodology rooted in control and secrecy, who had left behind students, some broken, some remade in his image. Travis, or Alan, was one of them. But unlike Peter, he didn't hide. He sat with agents and told them everything he remembered, every lesson, every punishment, every phrase Peter had repeated like scripture. Silence is strength. Obedience brings clarity. The door is not real unless you earn it. He described the symbols, the drawings, the places Peter said were safe and true. He had no proof of additional basements or trapdoors, but he said, "There are others. I don't know where." But he always said, "This is just the beginning." It was enough to widen the investigation. Enough to turn one story of 3 missing children into the possible tip of an iceberg no one wanted to believe existed. But back in California, something else stirred. Because while the FBI chased leads in the Midwest, a woman stepped forward. Middle-aged, quiet, a nurse. She had watched the press briefings, seen the age-progressed photos, and when she looked at Cara, she'd felt something shift. She'd seen that face before. Not in person, in a photo. In a box she'd found buried in the back of a patient's closet nearly 20 years ago. A patient named Everly. It was a psychiatric hospital, long closed now. The patient had been admitted under the name Gerald Everly. No relatives, no visitors. He was there for 2 years, spoke rarely, scribbled obsessively, always drawing circles with symbols inside. She had kept the box when the hospital shut down. Something about it felt important, like it didn't belong to the state, like it might matter someday. Inside, papers, letters, drawings, maps, and one envelope addressed to someone named Peter. Not mailed, just written, "Peter, if you find this, the keys are buried beneath the gate stone. Keep going, finish what we started." When agents followed the woman's directions, they located the hospital's original property and the gate stone at the rear fence. Beneath it, they uncovered a rusted metal box wrapped in cloth. Inside, keys, dozens of them. Old house keys, padlock keys, skeleton keys. Each is labeled with initials. Some matched known victims, others matched missing persons no one had ever connected. The implications were terrifying. Each key was a door. Each door could be a prison. And some of them might still be closed. The FBI confirmed what they had feared. Peter Everly wasn't the beginning. He was a student, just like Travis, just like Lily, just like Cara. Whatever this was, it had roots deeper than anyone had guessed. And it wasn't over. Cara sat by her window that night, turning a key over in her hands. One of the few labeled with her initials. She had no idea what lock it had once opened. But it didn't matter. That lock was gone. That door was closed. But there were others. She looked at Lily, asleep on the couch, finally breathing peacefully for the first time in months. "We didn't survive to be quiet," she whispered. Lily stirred. Cara added, "We survived to finish it." The wind rolled in over the California hills, brushing through the pine trees that bordered what had once been a home. The backyard was unrecognizable now. The pool was long filled in, the grass overgrown, and the fence warped with age. But the air still carried something, a memory, a shadow, and now a reckoning. The 3 families stood together again, 30 years later, shoulder to shoulder at the place where it had all begun. A ceremony had been organized by the FBI Victim Services Unit. A quiet moment, off camera, no press. Just them, the agents who never gave up, the survivors who defied the dark, and a few scattered chairs holding people who remembered that summer for the rest of their lives. Cara stood beside her mother, who still reached for her like she might vanish again. Lily wore a scarf to cover the surgical scar that twisted along her collarbone. but her eyes were steady now, unafraid. And Michael, the boy who had vanished last, who returned to the world with pieces missing but his spirit intact, held the folded note he had once hidden in a book's spine, now preserved in a glass case at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. One by one, they stepped forward to place a hand on a memorial stone. It bore no names, just 3 words carved into polished granite. We were found. But the story didn't end with that final touch, or with the speeches that followed, or even with the press release that the FBI issued later that month, because the truth wasn't static. It kept moving. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a set of GPS coordinates appeared in an anonymous email to the FBI tip line. The address led to a derelict property in rural Oregon, once owned by a shell corporation, linked to a trust account in Peter Everly's name. When agents arrived, they found another hidden room beneath the floorboards. Empty, but the walls told a story. More symbols, more etchings, and a calendar pinned to the wall. The last date marked July 2025, circled 3 times in red. It was May. They had 2 months. The FBI mobilized fast. Surveillance, field teams, digital forensics. They pored over old property deeds, trust files, and travel records. Every piece of data from the tapes recovered in Missouri was reanalyzed. Every missing person from 1979 to 2001 was reevaluated under new parameters. And then, in June, they found her. A woman in Arizona, early 30s, admitted to a hospital after a minor car crash. No ID, no insurance, no birth certificate. She'd always believed she was born in 1995. But the DNA said otherwise. She was a match for a girl who had vanished from a beachside campground in 1987, age 6, reported taken from a tent during a thunderstorm. No one had ever found a trace. The woman had a faint scar beneath her chin and an aversion to enclosed spaces. She said she'd always wondered why she never fit, why she remembered sounds that didn't match her life. Metal doors closing, the rattle of old pipes, a lullaby sung by a stranger with no face. And when they showed her the symbols, the ones found in California, Missouri, and Oregon, she said, she'd drawn them in her notebooks for years. When asked if she'd ever met a man named Peter, she paused, then said, "Not Peter, Paul." Or that's what he said to call him. He always wore gloves and never let us call him anything twice. The case shattered open again. The original theory that it was the work of one man collapsed. Peter wasn't a leader. He was a disciple. The system had been larger, deeper, and more methodical than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just basements. It wasn't just trapdoors. It was people damaged, ideological, methodical, building a legacy of silence. And somehow, Cara, Lily, and Michael had survived it. They had walked out of the dark. Together, they became something else. Not just survivors, not just symbols, but catalysts. They worked with law enforcement. They visited training academies. They helped design trauma-informed interviewing practices for adult survivors of long-term abductions. Lily learned to speak publicly. Cara published a memoir that read more like a coded map than a book. Michael went quiet again, preferring to volunteer behind the scenes, running support groups online under an anonymous handle known only to those who needed it most. They carried the weight differently, but they carried it. And every time a new tip came in a GPS coordinate, a photograph, a whisper from a facility nurse who remembered a drawing on a child's arm, they answered the call. Because somewhere, out there, another door might still be closed. And someone was waiting. One night, almost a year after the discovery, Cara stood alone at the old cul-de-sac. She walked to where the pool had been and sat on the grass. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to make her skin crawl. But not anymore. Now, it felt like clarity. She pulled a key from her pocket, the one labeled with her initials. She didn't know what lock it opened. Maybe she never would. But it was real. A symbol of something reclaimed. Cara closed her hand around it and whispered, "I remember." Not just the horror, but the songs, the whispered jokes, the way Lily used to hum before she fell asleep. The way Michael had shared the last crackers even when they were stale. The way they had survived, not just because they were strong, but because they had each other. They had been children in a pool on a summer afternoon. They had been ghosts. Now they were on fire. And this story, the one that began with silence and water, had become a warning. For those who still think they can hide behind masks in basements and forgotten names, for those who think children are easy to erase, they were wrong. Because sometimes the missing come back, and they don't come back quietly.